Alright, let's learn components today. So our today's job is to convert these actions, that is this details and edit links and this delete button, which is actually a form. We have to convert all of these into components. But before we do that, we have to understand what components are and why do we need them. So the closest thing you can think of in order to understand a component is like PHP having functions defined in it so that we can reuse certain pieces of code at multiple times simply by calling that function. Now we all know that HTML doesn't have any functions in it because HTML is a markup language, it's not a computational language. But we are aware that more often than not, we yearn for this capability in HTML. Rather than repeating a code at multiple times all over again, we wish sometimes that we had a concept similar to functions that we have in normal programming languages, in which we enclose certain HTML tags or certain HTML block of code, give it a name, and then wherever we need to reuse those pieces of lines, we simply call that function name. So this is the kind of capability that the Laravel blades are trying to provide us through components. So even though Laravel components are not functions because there is no concept of functions in HTML code itself, but it's a sugar-coated way of providing similar functionality in HTML code. So that's why components are gaining more and more popularity, because this way we can definitely avoid repetition. So this was general overview of what components are and why do we need them. Now before we actually start converting these anchors and this delete button into components, there is one more thing that is worth mentioning over here, which is, if you remember, the title of this series is Laravel with Livewire. Now Livewire is also a technology to incorporate components in the Laravel framework. Eventually we will move on to those Livewire components because they are much more powerful than the components provided by the Laravel itself. But we will discuss Livewire components when we actually get to implement them. For the admin side, I have decided to stick with the components offered by the Laravel framework itself. This will serve two purposes. First of all, you will understand how to define component at the very basic level. The Livewire components follow the similar concept. The Livewire components follow the similar lines as well, but they are much more advanced. So obviously there is more syntax to it and there are more concepts to it than these Laravel's basic components. So if you have already understood basic components, adding on to them will be much more easier later on. The other reason for sticking with Laravel components over here is that you will be able to appreciate the pros and cons of both of those components, and you will be in a better position to decide where to use Laravel's own components or to go for Livewire's component. Okay, so that was the intro of our today's tutorial. Now let's start working on the Laravel components. We have already figured out what components are. Now before we get our hands dirty with coding, let's get a bird's eye view of Laravel component. For that I have drawn diagram. Okay, a basic component in Laravel consists of two files. One is a PHP class and other is a view file. So if our components needs to have some kind of data to display, we can define that data over here, and before displaying it, if we need to modify that data, we need to do that within this PHP class as well. The view is actually a blade file, so over here you will decide how do you want your component to be shown in the browser. So it's all about its display, its presentation. And if you need to use any kind of data within this view, within those double curly brackets, if you want to use variables like we have been using with double curly brackets, so if you have to display any data, then that data comes from this PHP file. Now this is a basic component. Then we have certain variations of those components as well. If we do not have a lot of logic for our components, then we can integrate the PHP class file plus the view, the blade file, into one file. So in this case, we call that component an inline component because in this case, we will not have a separate view file. Rather, we will only have a PHP class file, and this class file will have a special function called render, which in this case also have. But in this case, that render function will return whatever this view file, the blade file, was supposed to return. So in the absence of this blade file, all the logic that is supposed to go in the blade file goes in that render function as a string. And we call such components inline components. Then we have another variation which is called anonymous components. In this anonymous component, we do not have any PHP class file at all. We only have just view associated with it. So if the component is very basic and it doesn't require any kind of data to display, just some static HTML tags and HTML text, in that case we go for anonymous component where we do not have any PHP class file for that component. Today, first of all, we will define this basic component with separate PHP class file and view file, and then for the delete button we will go for this anonymous component. As far as today's tutorial is concerned, we are not working on inline components. In future, if need arises, we will work on inline component as well. Okay, now finally we get our hands dirty with code inserting. So let's get started. Okay, now to create a component we need to execute a command which is php artisan make component. Next we have to provide the name of the component, but before we do that, let me just show you where those files will be created, because one file is going to be a PHP class file and another one is going to be a blade file. So as far as the PHP class file is concerned, it's going to be created in this F folder. So in this F folder, if a folder named view with uppercase V does not exist, then first that folder will be created, and within that folder another folder will be created with the name components with uppercase C, and within that folder this class file will be stored. And as far as the view is concerned, so let's go down to our resources folder. So there we have resources folder. Over here we have multiple folders and one of them is views folder. So in this views folder, currently we only have one admin folder that we have created ourselves. So when this command is executed, another folder will be created in this views folder with the name components with lowercase c, and within that folder the blade file for this component will be created. Since this is the very first component that we are creating, therefore we do not have that directory structure in our application, but the moment we hit this command, those folders will be created. So now it's time to give a name to this component. Let's give it the name action links, because most of the time these links will represent the edit and view actions of any resource. So now if we hit enter, this command will execute and the directory structure that I just mentioned will be created, and within those directory structures the files associated with this component will be created. But here is the thing, I don't want this action links files to be inserted directly into the components folder. Now since these components belong to the backend, our admin side, so I want to prepend it with admin / this way there will be another folder created with the name admin. So in the views folder with uppercase V, there will be created a components folder with uppercase C, and within there another folder with the name admin will be created, and this PHP class file will be placed in that folder because we have prepended it with this directory structure. And similar changes will be made to the views folder which contains blade files. So let's hit enter. Okay, now you can see we have this new folder created with the name view, and this folder has a subfolder with the name component, and within that component we have another folder named admin. Now since all of these folders are empty, so we have this / so views, components and admin, and within this admin folder we have this class file actionlinks.php. What's inside this we will get to that part later, but first let's go to our resources folder and see its blade file. Now in the views folder we have this components folder, so let's click it. Now in this components folder we have a folder named admin, and within this folder we have this file action-links.blade.php. Now this action starts with the lowercase a and a links starts with lowercase a, and in between them there is a hyphen. So this notation is called kebab case notation, and this notation is Pascal notation. So when in Pascal notation, when the name consists of multiple words, then first letter of each word is a uppercase word. So if this is how we define our component name, which consists of multiple names, then its associated blade file will be created with the kebab case notation of the same name. So each word is separated by hyphens and each word starts with a lowercase notation. Okay, so let's look at what's inside this blade file. So currently this blade file doesn't contain anything except this empty div text. Now let's have a peek into the class file. Okay, now this class file named action links extends component, which is an abstract class, and it only has one function defined in it called render. So we are implementing this over here. Now this render function is simply returning the view that we have associated, the blade view that we have associated with this component. So it's returning a view which is inside the components folder. So now this path with respect to the views folder in the resources folder. So within this that views folder, we have a folder named components. There we have another folder named admin, and there we have this action-links.blade.php file. So the render method is simply returning that view. Besides that, we have a constructor which is empty, and we don't have anything else in this whole class file. Okay, so now we have successfully created a component. Now we want to integrate it into another blade file so that we can see it in the browser. So before we do that, we should have something visible to be seen in the component. Currently we don't have anything that, even if the component is successfully integrated in the blade in the other views, there won't be anything to display in the browser because our blade file associated with that component is empty. So let's go to that blade file, which was action-links.blade.php, and let's put something within this div. So let's write, this is my first component. Now this text is a static text. That means if I create multiple components, let's say 100 components, all of those 100 components will have this text. There is no way at the moment to change this text dynamically. We will get to that part later, but first let's integrate that component into one of our blade files so that we can see it in the browser. Okay, so let's go to index.blade.php file. So this is our index file, this part. So we are going to display one blade over here, one component over here, the component that we have just created. So at the very end, so this index consists mainly of for loop, for else, and it's iterating over categories as category object. Okay, so and this is an empty section. So if our categories array was empty, then this paragraph would have been displayed. So we are going outside that whole for else loop, and over here we want to insert our component. Now to insert a component, we have to use the same syntax that we use for different PHP tags. For example, for the div, this is the syntax. So we have an opening div tag and closing div tag. Sometimes we don't have closing div tag and we have just one tag which opens and closes in the same tag. So we have similar concept for the components as well. But to differentiate this tag from regular PHP tags, we have to distinguish it. So to distinguish it, we are prepending every component name with X hyphen. So if any tag begins with this X hyphen, that means whatever follows next is actually the name of a Laravel component. So in our case, the name of the Laravel component is, we have to use the name that the blade file or the view file has been given. This one, the kebab case notation. So action-links. Now we can close it like this because we are not passing any data to this component. But the thing is this, we will run into an error. So first let's see that error. It says unable to locate a class or view for component action links. That's because the Laravel is looking for that component in this components folder, but we have not placed this component directly into this components folder. In that components folder, we have created another directory named admin, and there we have placed this component. So we have to define the relative path starting from this components path. So we have to say we have a directory named admin, then dot, then action-links. So we have to define the relative path starting from the components folder. Now hopefully this will work. Okay, so now the error message is gone and you can see the component has been placed at the end, which says this is my first component. Okay, so that was the first part. Now we have to think of how can we pass data to this component to turn it into a dynamic component. So when we pass data to a component, our component can change dynamically depending on what kind of data it has been given. Now in Laravel, there are 3 different ways through which you can send data to a component. Let's start with the easiest one, the simplest one. Okay, so let's look at this paragraph tag. So this paragraph tag has this starting tag and this closing tag. And within those two starting and closing tags, we have some text placed over here. If this is how we want to send data to our component, then we say that we are sending data to the component slots. So whatever you place between the starting and closing tags of a component, that data will be said to have been sent to the component as a slot. So the components by default has a variable defined in them which is called slot. So that data will be made available in the component using that slot variable. So first let's send the data to the component. To send the data to the component, we need to have both ending and closing tags for that component. Now you can write anything over here. Let's send a paragraph. This para is inserted to component slot. So we are sending a paragraph to the component, and this paragraph is accessible in the component through a predefined default variable named slot. So let's go to our blade file. Now since this variable is by default defined by the Laravel itself, that means even if we don't see it, it's defined over here. Okay, so now we want to display whatever we have received in the slot over here. So we simply use this slot variable within those double curly brackets that will echo out the whatever we are echoing out. What happened? Okay, so somehow I've deleted this name from the starting tag. Okay, because of the paragraph. Okay, this is an extra. Deleted. Okay, so this is the starting tag. Wow. Okay, autocorrection has done something unexpected. Okay, now this is fixed. Okay, good. So we have this one, the static tags, and this one we send to the component using slot. So this para is inserted through the component slot. Now to appreciate it even more, let's create one more component. So copy and paste. Now over here, let's send an unordered list. Home, contact us, services. Now let's see. Okay, now as you can see, the first component has been sent this dynamic data, so it's playing that data. Then for the second component, again this part is static, however the second part was dynamic. So now we don't have this para is inserted through component slot, instead we have an unordered list. So this is the beauty of using components. We can dynamically send any data that we want. Okay, let's remove the second one. Okay, so this is one way to send data. Now let's move on to another way of passing data to the component. Now let me have a look. Okay. Now let's have a look at this anchor tag. Now this anchor tag has an attribute with the name href. So this href is the name of the attribute. Then next to that, this is its value up till the end. Okay, so this href is basically an example of attribute. We can have similar attributes through which we can pass data to the components. So let's go down and let's define some attribute. We can name this attribute anything we like, but I'm passing my name to this component, so I'm giving this attribute the name as well. So for the name, the value that I'm passing is nj. Now we are sending or passing this data to the attribute, to the component, but our component should be able to catch that attribute and display it in the component as well. Now, since this is not a slot way of sending data, this is an attribute way of sending data, so we need to do something in our component class file. As I mentioned earlier, that this data that I'm passing between these starting and closing tags of a component, that data is made available through a variable named slot. Now, this variable is already defined within this component, even though we can't see it, but it's there. So that's why we were able to access this slot variable over here. Now when it comes to accessing data through attributes, first of all, we have to register the name of the attribute with our component class file. So we have to go to this class file, action links, and over here we have to define a public variable matching the name of the attribute. So okay, B is missing. So public, now name. Now this name has to match the name that we have given to our attribute. Okay, then we have to initialize this name with this value, whatever value we are passing. So to initialize this variable with the value, we have to pass this as a parameter to our constructor function. Then the body, initialize the name, that is this name, with this value. Okay, so now we have an attribute registered with our class file, component class file, and we have initialized it with the value that has been given to it, where we are using this component. Currently the value is nj. Okay, now we are ready to access that variable within our blade view. So we can write another paragraph over here. My name is, and pass this variable name. Okay, now let's access it. Now we can see another line, my name is, and the name is nj. Now let's change it to from nj to coding shorting. My name is coding shorting. So this is another way to pass the data to the component, that is using attributes. Now since this was a string that we were passing, if instead rather than passing a string we were passing some variable, let's give it a name var, then we had to prepend this attribute name with colon. Otherwise we cannot send any variable with the attribute. So if you are sending anything other than a string literal, you have to prepend the attribute name with colon, and then you can pass any variable you like. Now since this var variable doesn't exist, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use a PHP directive, and within these two opening and closing PHP directives I'm defining this variable, and let's give it name coding shorting with nj. Now we are able to receive this whole name, coding shorting with nj. So if a simple string, you don't have to prepend this colon to the attribute name. However, if you are passing any kind of variable to it, you have to prepend it with this colon. So this was second way of passing data to components, that is using attributes. Now let's move on to the third way of passing data to the attributes. Now third way of passing data to attribute has also to do with the attribute style of passing data to the components. For example, let's give it a class, and the class is resource actions, so some random class name. Now if I want to pass this as an attribute, but I don't want to register this variable name or attribute name over here as an instance variable of the class, so if I don't want to do that, then I can still access this class attribute using third way of passing data, which is there is another default variable already made available to us in the component classes, and the name of that attribute is attributes with capital S. So if there are any attributes defined over here, whether it is one attribute or multiple attributes, it doesn't matter. So no matter how many attributes are defined over here which are not registered in our component class, then all of those attributes will be made accessible to us in the blade file through another built-in variable which is called attributes. So let's put another paragraph. So all the attributes this component currently has, and then we can display the variable. attributes. So attributes with capital S. So this is a built-in variable, just like slot. Any attributes defined in the component but not registered with the class file are going to be accessed in the blade file through this variable attributes. So currently we have just one such attribute. Let's see. Okay, so it's displaying all the attributes that this component currently has. Class equals resources. Now let's add one more. Let's type is, let's put something random action. Okay, now you can see there are two attributes accessible through the attributes variable. And if you want to display any specific attribute, so you will chain it with the get method or call the get method on this attributes variable, which we now know is an object. So let's call class attribute, and this is the value of class attribute. Okay, so these were three different ways of passing data to attributes. Now we are ready to convert these anchor tags into components. So let's get to it. So let's comment this out. Let's go up, and over here we are defining details anchor and edit anchor. So let's convert this into an anchor into a component. So admin dot action links. Okay, now as a slot we want to pass this title, the caption. So since this details begins with D and the delete also begins with D, where is this delete? This one. So this begins with, both of them begins with D, so I'm changing the caption from details to view. Because if details and delete both begin with view, and if the admin is not careful, the admin might accidentally click on delete resource when it actually wanted to view the details. So in order to avoid that kind of confusion, I'm passing the caption view as a slot variable to this component. Now we have to pass this route name, this one, and this param, route param, because this anchor tag depends on these two values to work properly. So we are passing them as attribute values. So first one, since this is a text, a string, so I'm passing it as a text-based text-based attribute. So I'm giving this attribute the name route name, and I'm passing this value category.show to that. Copy, paste, and for this route param, let's copy it and define another attribute, route param, and pass that array to it. Now we are passing an array, that's why I have prepended it with colon. Okay, so now we have to register these two attributes with our component class. So let's go to the component class, which is action links. Over here, register them, param name, route name, public route param. Okay, now we have to initialize these two instance variables with whatever value is provided over here. So for that we have to pass them to the constructor. So route name and route param. Now I am going to assign this route param a default value, because we are eventually going to use this component for other anchor tags as well, which might not necessarily need this route param. Only the route name would be necessary. So in that case, I don't want to run into any kind of errors, so that's why I have initialized it with an empty array. So this way, if our component doesn't provide this value, we will still have an empty array its value. Okay, so now let's give them values or initialize them. route name and route param. Now since these are initialized, so that means their current values are accessible inside the action links blade file. So we don't need all of this because we just need an anchor tag over here. So let's go to our index.blade.php and let's cut it from here, save and paste it over here. When this when this component is used, we want this anchor tag to be displayed. Now this data is dynamic, so we want to pass route name over here, and as far as the second one, let's replace it with route param, and over here let's just display the slot variable. That's it. So if you notice, we can already see the view over here. Now this is actually a component. So let's click on this link to see if we are being redirected. Yes, we are. That means the component is working properly. Now let's replace this anchor tags with the same component as well. So index page, copy and paste it over here. Now let's comment this anchor tag. Now for the route name, we have this category dot edit. We are passing the same route parameter, so this one is fine. Now for the slot value, the name was edit. Okay, good. Let's click somewhere. Okay, so that means we have successfully replaced the normal anchor tags with components. Now we have to define the styling for this component, but before we do that, let's replace this anchor tag with the component. Let me delete this. Okay, let's go up. Okay, now we have to replace this anchor tag with the component as well. Okay, now the route name in this case is route category.create, and this one doesn't require any route parameter, so let's delete this thing. Now in this case, the route parameter will get empty array at the time of initialization. Okay, and for this slot value, we have to attach this add new category. So copy and paste it over here. Have I put 2-1? Oh yes, let's comment this anchor tag. Okay, good. So now this is another anchor tag. Now we are ready to define styling for these anchor tags. So for the view, I want it to display it in green color. For the edit, I want to display it in the blue color. And for a normal link, I want to display it in some color. Let's define this later. What color? Okay, so let's go and define the styling. Let's remove this comment to avoid the clutter. Okay, now the styling is going to be defined in the view. Okay, now let's define the style tag. Now here's the thing, since we will be integrating these components into other blade files which already have these kind of anchor tags, so if some styling is defined there for those anchor tags and then we define the styles over here generally for anchor tags, then those two styles are going to clash. So in order to avoid the clash, we are going to have defined some class over here. So let's give it a class name default. Let's make it default action. Now let's define some style for the default action class. First of all, let's turn this anchor tag, which is an inline element, into a block element. So display is going to be inline block. Then now since it's a block element, let's give it some width. So we are saying whatever is the width of its container, means where this anchor tag is placed. So give 40% of that container's width as the width of this anchor tag, and for the height, let's make it 80%. Then we don't want border and no outline. color, let's temporarily give it black color. Let's make it background color. And for the text color, give it white color. Let's change this black color to 43, 49, 48. Okay. Now let's give it round edges. 40 pixels to give it round edges. For the box shadow, 5 pixel horizontal offset, 5 pixel vertical offset. Then blur 10 pixels, and the color, let's give it gray color. Why is it blue? Okay, this one is extra. Okay, we have to bring this text in the center and remove this underline. Okay, so we have to replace this inline block to flex. That will again make it a block element. Justify content center, align item center, text decoration is none, text transform capitalize. Let's define font styles as well. So font weight 500 and font size, let's make it 1.2 rem, letter spacing 0.1 rem. Okay, good. Now we have to define some hovering style. So first of all, let's define transition property for the smooth hovering effect to transition into on 0.5 second and ease. Now for the hover, so parent colon hover, let's use transform and scale the element in question 1.1 or 1.1 is enough. Okay, that's better. Okay, so now what we want to do is that if this is a view button, the color should be green. If this is edit, the color should be blue, and for the normal, this should be the color. So basically we want to have 3 different type of classes. So we have to define 2 more classes. Let's give them view class, where we are just changing the background color, no other property. This should be color. Okay, so this is a shade of green, and because there can be a clash between this background color and this one, so let's attach important to it as well. Copy paste and change the name from view to edit. Now over here the color is a shade of blue. Okay, so basically now we have to pass some information based on which we know that what kind of class it is. So the default class is this one, and every component is going to have this class. If the other class is also present, such as view, the background color should change to green, and if it's added, the background color should change to blue. Now this information is supposed to come from where we are using this component. For this anchor tag, which is adding new category, since this is a default component, it's neither view nor edit component, so we are not passing any class attribute over here. But for the other two, we have to provide this attribute. Let's remove this one as well, we don't need it. Okay, for these two attributes, for these two anchors, we must provide the class name. So we are going to say class, since first one is the view one, so the class is view, and for the second one, the value is edit. Okay, now here's the problem. We are sending an attribute with the name class, and since this attribute name is not registered as an instance variable in the class, so this will be made available through the attributes bag in the view file. But we have another attribute with this anchor tag with the name class, so there is going to be a clash. If we don't do anything about this clash, then let's see what happens. So apparently nothing seems to have happened. Now let's inspect this, and if you notice, this one has only one class. This is default class. The other one doesn't seem to have worked out. which makes sense as well because we haven't even used any attributes from the attributes bag. So now what shall we do? We cannot know for certain that every time this component is used, we are going to have a class attribute present in the component. Had we be certain, then we would have done something like this. So in the blade file for the attribute, we are giving this class name for certain, and for the other one, we are saying from the attributes bag, get this attribute with the name class. So whatever is the value of class attribute, that will be placed over here. That should ideally solve our problem. But the problem is that not all components are going to have this attribute, the class attribute. For example, this first one. This one doesn't have any class attribute. So we have to make some other changes. So this class is a special type of attribute for which we can do something else. Let me cut it, and now I'm saying over here attributes merge. Now merge is a method that I'm calling on attributes, and as a parameter to this merge I'm passing an array. So the key is class, and for the value I'm going to use this name, default actions. Default action. So this way what will happen, if the component contains an attribute named class over here, then whatever is the value of that class, it's going to be merged with this value, default action. So it will end up having the same effect, which is class default action. And if class attribute is present, such as let's say view, then it will work out something like that. So both class values will be merged. If there is nothing to merge, then only this value we attach to this anchor tag, and hopefully this has resolved the problem. And you can see this one has been turned green, this one has been turned blue, and this one doesn't have any class attribute, so just the default action attributes have been applied to it. This class is a special type of attribute which, if it's present in the component itself, in the view of the component itself, and is sent as an attribute value, so both will be merged together. But for other components which are not registered in the class file and which are present over here as well as sent through this component, so there is a clash. So in that case, the value that has been sent will take effect. The other value will be overwritten, but for the class we can merge them together. So this class is a special type of attribute where if we have multiple attributes with the name class, their values will be merged together. Okay, so now we are done with the component associated with the anchor tags. Now we can move on to the delete tag, which is a form. So this delete button, now we can convert this into a component, and we are going to convert it into an anonymous component. And remember, the anonymous component does not have any associated class file, PHP class file. So let's get started. PHP artisan make component. We want this to be in admin folder as well. Let's make it delete form. Now since we want this component to be anonymous component, so we have to attach a flag which is view. So this means only view will be created. No PHP class file will be created for the component. Hit enter. Okay, now let's check. First of all, let's go to the views. Okay, so we have this delete form, delete-form.blade.php. Now let's go and check it in the app folder. In the app folder, view components admin. So we don't have any more file over here, only action links files. This is for the first component that we created. So hence prove that we have successfully created an anonymous function over here. And this one, I deleted the default content of this component. Now we are going to place a form over here. So form is defined in the action.blade.php file. Sorry, index.blade.php file. Okay, so let's go down, and this is our form. Cut. Let's close this action links.php file. Let's go to delete-form.blade.php and paste this form over here. Now this form requires two attribute values, category.destroy and then this array. We are not going to use slots for this kind of information, and we can't send it through attributes because the normal attributes need to be registered in the PHP file, which we don't have at the moment, and other one is through attributes bags. We don't want to make them available through attribute bags as well. So what is the solution in that case? So for the anonymous components, when there is no associated class file, in that case, if you want to pass data to the component as normal attributes, in that case we have to register all such component names, attribute names in another directive which is called props. So over here you can mention all the keys which represents attribute names which you think will be used in the component over here. So we are going to use the same keys. So route name is one key or one attribute name which we expect to receive as a attribute value. The other is route param. Make it small. Okay. Now for this first one, let's replace it with route name, and for the second one, let's replace it with route param. So when the component is anonymous and we don't have associate class file, this is the way to register attribute names with the component. Now we have to provide both of these attribute names in the component where we are using it. So we are using it in the form. So x-admin, and the name is delete-form dot delete-form. So starting tag and now closing tag. The slot is empty, so okay, we don't have any slot value, so we can use this syntax. Now for the attribute, so one was route name and the value is category.destroy. That's the route name associated with this link, the associated with this route. And for the route param, now because we are passing an array to it, so colon, append a colon to it, and then copy and paste it over here. Okay, now it should work. Okay, good. So we can still see the delete button over here. That means the component is working because we don't have any form over here. We have this component and the form is inside this component's view file or blade file. Now all we need to do is that we have to define the styles for this component. So for the styles, again, in order not to have the styles defined for this form clash with other forms on the page, if there are any, we have to give them some class names. So this is delete form, and for the input type, class is delete form button. Now we are going to define styles for these two classes. We basically have to define the styles for this input field, but since this input field is inside the form, which is the sibling of these two elements, so we are first of all giving it the same width and height that we have given to these two siblings, that is width 40% and height 80%. Delete form, width is 40%. Let's give it height 40% as well. The rest of the styling for this delete form button is going to be the same that we have defined for the action components in the default this default action class, whatever is the styling is defined over here, we are simply copying all of this style to delete form button, paste it over here. Now let's make some changes. Okay, we don't need to make it display flex because the caption for the input buttons is already centrally aligned and justified. Then text decoration, none, we don't need it. Text transform, capitalize, fine. Font weight, letter, okay. Width, now we are going to make it 100%. So whatever is the parent width, which is 40%, the same is going to be the width of the child, and 100% as well. Okay, let's have a look. Before we make any further changes, we have to change the color though. E is missing. Okay, I have made it 40%. Let's make it 80%. Yeah, that's better. Now change the color. The color is CC4641. Okay, they seem to be working, but they are congested, so we need margins. So let's give overall this form a margin over here, and margin top and left 0, so top bottom 0, for left and right make it 0.5 frame. Okay, good. We need similar space between these two as well. So copy, and let's go to action links and let's place it over here as well. Good. So it seems to be working. Now there is one more thing I need to show you. Let's inspect. Okay, so this is category actions. So if you notice over here, so this is the first anchor tag view, and then the second one is the styles that we have defined for this one, for the component. Then we have the second child added, then again the styles have been inserted. So there is a repetition of styles. So we want this style to be inserted just once, not as many times as there are components used. So how can we do that? So there are some PHP directives available which is going to help us insert this style definition just once in our form. So this is how we are going to do it. So this whole page is actually the layout page. So what we are going to do is that we are going to create a placeholder in this layout page, and then the styles that we have defined within the components, even though we will define within the component, but we will instruct the component to lift those styles and place them within the layout page, and just place them there only once. That means it's already those styles are present. Do not keep inserting them, just once. Insert these styles only once in the layout page, and because they are present in the layout page, they will be accessible to these components as well. So to do that, first of all we have to go to the layout page, and over here we are going to create a placeholder, and to create a placeholder we are going to use a directive called stake, and as a parameter to this stake you have to provide a string. That string is going to be the name of this placeholder, the space that is going to be placed. We are going to name it component styles. So now there has been a space, empty space created with the name component styles. So we have created, basically it's a stack that we have created. Now we have to go to the components, which is action links, and over here let's cut this whole style tag, cut, and use another directive which is push once, and here we have to give it mention the name of the state where we want to push those styles. So we have given the name component styles and paste everything back. So this will push these styles into this stack. Where did it go? This one over here. But because we have used push once, so only once these styles will be pushed. Refresh. Now let's inspect. Now if you notice, this is first anchor tag, but there is no sibling style. Then this is second anchor tag, but no sibling style. However, for the form, since we haven't pushed its styles to the layout page, so there is this style associated with this delete button present over here. Then if we move down again, where is category actions? There. No associated style over here, no associated style for the edit, but for the form we have again repetition of the styles, the delete form. Okay, so now we have to do the same for the delete button as well. So let's go to delete, and first of all let's remove these comments. Okay, cut. Push once. Now again we are pushing it to the same step. Step. So the name is component styles, and paste back everything. Let's inspect. Okay, so there is a form, but the style sibling is missing. Again for the form, the style sibling is missing, so they have all been moved to the layout page and just pushed once. So that is that. We learn new directives as well. Now the next thing that we need to do is that we have to replace these links with the components as well. So these links and this link as well. This is delete button, which is actually a form. Okay, so let's do that. So this is our show page. Let's close this one as well, this one as well, and now show.play.php. Okay, now we have to replace both of these links. This one is edit and second one is delete. Now because these are inside the paragraph, and once we replace this with the delete form, then because form is a block element, so we cannot place it inside the paragraph. A paragraph cannot have any element which is a block element, so that means we have to replace it with the div, just like we did for the index.blade.php. So what I'm going to do is that I'm simply copying this whole div from the index page, copy and paste it in the show page, paste. But this one doesn't have view because we are already viewing this category. Okay, so first one is edit, route name is category this is going to be edit, so let's keep it same, edit. The route name is category, and okay, fine. The second one is destroy. Okay, fine, we don't need to make any changes over here. The only thing is that we have to change the CSS file, the SCSS file associated with this show file, to account for replacing the last paragraph with the div. So let's open that file, show.scss, and this is the category paragraph last child. We have to replace it with the, what is the name, category actions. Okay, good. So now the space is less, so that's why this is occupying 40% of that space. Now let's replace this back button. So let's go to index and let's copy this link, copy, go to show page. So this is our anchor tag, comment this out, paste. Okay, the route name is category.index. There is no other parameter, route param, and the slot value is back. Okay. Okay, good. So this is also working. That was view. Now for the edit, we have to make the similar change over here, but that I am leaving as a homework for you guys. You can do that. So that brings us to the end of this tutorial where we learned almost everything about the components, and I hope you liked it. So if you do like it, please do not forget to comment it and like it and subscribe it, and if possible, please share it with your friends. That would be a great help. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye bye.